background. So I come from that pastoral background, but then at some point I realized, man, I really love working with the kid who's challenged with his family. And so I went back and did my clinical training. And so I'm actually a licensed clinical social worker. And so I kind of have that pastoral hat and a little bit of that clinical hat, and they're pretty interchangeable for me. They both are very much a part of who I am, and hard to say where one begins and the other stops, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And so just so everybody knows, I got to meet Tony in my time in ministry when I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and actually got to sit with Tony in a season of counseling and help me navigate just some different some things in my life that I needed help with. And I don't know about Tony if you run into this often, but do you often run into the stigma um, of of fear of counseling?
Sure, yeah. And one thing that I would say is, we give Gen Xers and the new generations that are coming up. We give them kind of a bad rap for so many things. One of the things
Yeah.
that I think is actually improving, Brent,
Yeah.
is I think the younger generations are kind of going, man, I gotta have some place to talk about this and deal with these things.
Yeah.
And so I think it's actually getting better. But being around the church for as long as I have, a lot of times even in the church, unfortunately, the church puts some negative pressure on there of
Yeah.
you ought to be able to figure all this out. You ought to be able to pray about it, or
Yeah.
find a scripture that helps you figure this out. And I think that's kind of an unfortunate pressure.
Yeah.
It's really important. You just see in scripture all the mandates to encourage one another and love one another and pray for one another. And I don't know where that happens better. I mean, it's kind of a sanctuary in the
Right.
counseling office sometimes, where people can just feel safe and feel comfortable and
Yeah.
feel at home. And I think that stigma is decreasing. But
Yeah.
I certainly have never really felt too much of that.
Yeah.
And I say that not just as a professional counselor,
Yeah.
but I say that because Rhonda and I, my wife and I, have sat down with people and needed counsel and needed encouragement, and
Yeah.
we've had two of our three kids in counseling at one point or another, just
Yeah.
because we understand the value of another perspective.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things we talked about today is kind of like, even growing up sometimes, the term depression or needing counseling was seen as this, it was almost demonized. It was like, okay, so what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you that
Yeah,
you can't handle life all by yourself? And I do agree with you. Some of that comes from that like works based. I am what I work. I know I struggle with
mhm,
that. Like I am what I
mhm.
achieve. I am what I get done. And so the thought of sitting and contemplating on yourself or maybe on your fears or your worries is often seen as weakness. And I'm grateful for you and for Freedom Counseling and for men and women like yourself who give a space for marriages, for people all over the map, all over the map. And so I'm grateful for you. Appreciate your time tonight. And so
Appreciate
um,
that.
I'm still figuring out my bearings here, and so there's some. We're gonna take some questions on Facebook. If you are joining us live, you can ask questions on the spot. I've got a list of questions to start with, Tony, and we'll like start the clock. We've got 55 minutes left, and it's gonna be awesome. Okay, so and if we run out of stuff to talk about, I'll just start asking you questions about what's wrong with me, and you can help me navigate those things.
Yeah, well, I might turn the tables on you there too,
All
because
right.
as you know from our time together, it's like
Yeah.
one of the best things about being a counselor is I start giving advice or counsel, and then I'm like, golly, I think I better go home and do that,
Yeah.
because I need it as much as everybody else does.
Yeah. Um, okay. First question. You ready? All right. First
Sure.
question. First question is this. We're in this crazy season of pandemic, and no matter where you are in the country or in the world, life changed pretty rapidly and has since continued to change rapidly. What are you, just as as a professional in this field, what are you noticing about this season, and what is it about this, what is it about change and pandemic or whatever you want to call this season that you feel like triggers people into anxiety or or depression or fear or those things?
Yeah, well, I know you guys are out there in California. Most of the folks who are probably tuning in are in California. But here in Kentucky, it's like, how can you avoid, the fear? It's our government leaders, all the unknowns. I mean, it is really just a challenging time, I think, to even listen to the news and not just kind of have this, what I would call just that clenched experience where you're a little tight. And the latest for us is healthcare stuff is beginning to open up again here in Kentucky, and so I'm listening, kind of leaning in a little bit clenched, like when can I see somebody in my office again? It's like
Yeah.
there's just so many things to be anxious about. And I think one of we'll get to some of this, but I think there's definitely some silver linings in this season. And I think one of them that I think, uh, you know, I hesitate to kind of put words in God's mouth, obviously, but one of the things that I think he must be saying is, man, I've got to go to great lengths to kind of get you guys out of your control sickness. We are so used to being in control of our own lives.
Hmm.
And I think what this has done on a global scale is kind of remind people, hey, there's a lot of things you're not in control of. And
Yeah.
that's a terrifying thing, but it's a reality that we ought to let sink in a lot more than we actually do. We are so duped into believing that I'm in control of everything. And boy, in this season, that could not be more clear. There's a lot of things that are completely out of our control.
Yeah. So what do you see, like, as a, just on the fly, just reacting to that, like, what do you see often, or maybe what do you feel in yourself, or what, because when I lose control, I try and grab for it back, or I try and find
Absolutely.
what I can control or what I can
Yeah.
manipulate. And so what is that in what is that in us, and what's dangerous about that?
Well, I think all of us in this season are getting reminded too of the things that we do when we're panicked, right? I mean, everybody kind of makes light of it, but everybody's afraid they're going to come out of this, pandemic, 15, 20 pounds heavier, just because you're panic eating.
Yeah.
You're panic eating, you're panic, binge watching on streaming services. People are, I mean, I'm sure the headlines are the same there as they are here. It's like alcohol sales are through the roof,
Yeah.
uh, and so whatever that is that you've gone to for comfort, it's going to be much more likely that you're going to run to that in this season. And I know that's been somewhat true for me. There, those old familiar things, whether it's eating a little more. I am so fortunate because I told you earlier, Brent, my daughter was getting married. So I was already on the program, to try and lose some weight. And
Yeah.
I'm one of the rare people that's probably lost weight in the pandemic because I just got some good grooves going. So it's been kind of fun, a little bit of a challenge. It's like, can I do it
Yeah.
when this is hitting? But for all of us, we have those go-to things that we look to for comfort. And those, I think we're most susceptible to those in a season like this, where as you mentioned, so many other things are out of control and beyond our control, that, you know what, I can have that slice of pie. I can have, stick my hand for the eighth time in that bag of chips. I can stop by the liquor store on my way home and just get a little liquid comfort,
Yeah.
to take out onto my back porch. And all those things, I think, are more likely in this season than they would be, because everything else feels so out of control.
Like, because you can list those off pretty easily, but I think we can often have blind spots in our own life, in our own soul, where it's like, well, what is it, like, how do you discover your coping mechanism? Like, you're either conscious or subconscious, like, how do you drill down into that spot where you say, here's what I'm struggling with?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it depends on how willing are you to hear the truth.
Yeah.
The people closest to us, oftentimes are the best source of that. When we have some blind spots, I used to kind of give people an assignment sometimes when they were really struggling, or I felt like I was pushing and that I was meeting resistance, with somebody I was counseling. One of the things I would say to them is I would say, okay, pick, the 5 people in your life that you feel the closest to, and ask them a series of questions,
Yeah.
ask them that question. How do you see me cope when I'm in a stressful situation?
Huh.
And if you ask the 5 people closest to you, when you get to be my age, it's like you ask your children that, it's
Yeah.
like, it's a mistake. Don't do it. They will tell you exactly what you do, when you're under stress. It's been great, as I mentioned, having my daughter back home. And man, she has always been the one. She's a lot like me. And so if I want the truth, and she's really pretty skilled at how she delivers it, real matter of fact, real nonchalant,
Yeah.
but man, it just goes right through you because you go, man, I know she's right.
Yeah.
And I can either acknowledge that and accept it and move toward ownership, or I can resist it again. And then, one thing I've said a number of times over the years too, is I've said, if you don't deal with your own stuff, somebody else is going to have to,
Hmm. Yeah,
you
like
know,
your kids or your spouse or your friends or the future generations down the line.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I'm just I really do believe some of the things you're talking about. I think it's a strength, when we will stop and be mindful, or be contemplative, and just kind of say, hey, I need to stop and think about these things, because if you don't, invariably, it's going to affect other people.
Yeah.
The less willing you are to look at your own stuff, the more other people are going to have to deal with it.
And that's kind of scary for me, right? Because yesterday I took my son on a hike on a hill back here, or a mountain, or whatever you want to call it. And we're hiking up the mountain, and I said, "Buddy, what's one thing I can do better in this season?" Because I want to be better. We all want to be better people, better dads, better friends, better whatever. We want to be better. And but I don't know, like over my 13 years now of being a dad, I've learned that, like, somebody once told me marriage is a mirror and being a parent
Mhm.
is a mirror. Like you look at your
Yeah.
kids and you're like, I don't know why they act like that. And I'm like, and you put a mirror up to your face, and that's why.
Yeah.
But I asked my son, I said, what can I do better? And he said, you can get, what he said, you can get angry slower. And I was like, oh man, that was a gut punch. That's a gut punch. Because in this season of high stress and high pressure, I can easily, like you said, that clenched feeling can pop out
Yeah.
anger, pop out just this control, or like I just need quiet, or I just need silence. And so I don't know. I think that's powerful. That self-reflection and self-awareness that you talk about has been really good. It's been really,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I've got a quick question here that somebody texted in. And if you're on Facebook, make sure you're asking questions. If you've got something, I know it's probably uncomfortable and maybe even vulnerable to type a question. Just say asking for a friend, and that'll be fine.
That's right. That's the code.
And so we already talked about the stigma. Well, this is the question about stigma surrounding medication. We can come back to that here in a minute. But second question was, is there a thin line between seasons of sadness, challenge, exhaustion, etc., and clinical depression? Is that something bigger? Are there things you look for / we should look for in our lives that might mean we are experiencing something more than just significant emotional circumstances that may need to be dealt with in a different way? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great. Now, one thing we've talked about, I mean, my wife and I talk about this consistently, and so far, God has been graceful. The stars have aligned, and it's like when I have a really bad day where I hit a wall, we've heard the term out here. You guys probably heard it too, just the quarantine fatigue, where
Ah,
you're locked away. And so I've hit that, probably 2 or 3 times over this time. The other day, um, I had read in the morning, I had watched an old, Lakers, Celtics, championship game or something on TV. And then when Rhonda came back out of the bedroom after doing some things back in the bedroom, she came out. I was sitting in the recliner, staring straight ahead at nothing. just sitting there. And she came out and she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I'm really not." And and of course, I went to the back porch and found something that I cope with, which was my pipe or a cigar or something, and we sat out there for about an hour and a half. And I came back in and I was like, "Okay, I'm all right now."
Yeah.
But those type of moments are to be expected, where we're so out of our routine, we're facing these things that we can't control. We're more not just socially distant, but we are more socially isolated,
Yeah.
most of us. And let's face it, there's only so many Zoom calls or Zoom meetings that you can get into without still kind of hitting that wall and going, it's not the same.
Yeah.
And so, to me, everybody ought to expect, I just don't know too many people that are, bulletproof and can't have some moments like this in, in a prolonged season like we're in here.
Yeah.
But if you are having multiple days where you're having trouble getting out of bed, where you are eating too much or not eating enough, if you are irritable, if just this consistent waking up kind of in a grumpy mood, those are good indicators that, hey, this might be something that is moving from just the discomfort and kind of having a bad day, or having, a sad day, to more of what I would call, clinical depression. And really the things that we use to measure that are just length of time. And so again, when you're putting, 4 or 5 days together like that, or your loved ones are calling it out, and everywhere you're going, people are going, "Are you okay? Are you doing all right?" It's like there's a reason why it's very difficult for us
Yeah.
to mask that. Some people do better than others,
Yeah.
but especially with depression,
Yeah.
it's hard to really mask that over the period of, an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And so I think that those are good indicators that maybe it's time for us to see if we, can either introduce some healthy things that would help us deal with the depression naturally, and those are not rocket science. It usually is, nutrition, exercise, and connection are the ones that I kind of always emphasize with people.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing those things well, then you're just starting at a deficit. If you don't get out and take that walk, or if you don't, try to eat better food. Again, food is one of those comfort things for me, always has been. And I will eat to numb. And what am I numbing? Well, I'm numbing the anxiety, or I'm numbing the depression. And so when those things are the case, that's when we want to be able to kind of say, hey, I need some help here.
Yeah.
And there may be some organic things in our life, a spouse or family members or friends who can give you some of that support. But
Yeah.
if you are not even getting to those things, if you're isolating from your family,
Yeah.
if you're isolating from friends, and you are just kind of pulling inward, then absolutely you need to talk to somebody. You need to talk to a counselor. And as they were saying already in the question that we'll get to, there are times that it's really appropriate to call your doctor and to say, hey, I'm really struggling here.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need something to kind of change the body chemistry a little bit too.
Yeah. Let's talk about that real quick since we're on it. Like, the question was, can you speak a little bit about the role of stigma surrounding medication in the Christian community? Is that something you
Yeah.
experience with a lot of clients, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, so absolutely. I feel like we do see that in Christian community, and I think it's unfortunate. Okay, that's kind of where I'll start. But I will say this: I tend to meet people right where they are. I am not somebody who, there's a reason I didn't become a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I didn't want to just kind of, treat specimens kind of walking into my office and try to figure out the medical equation to help them feel better.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's really good psychiatrists out there, and then there's psychiatrists who do just treat specimens, and I wouldn't send any of my friends or family to them,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I just don't think that's treating the whole person. Okay, and so I think there is a stigma with that, and I think it's unfortunate. But my approach is, number one, I will start with people and I'll say, okay, let's talk about the basic things that you can do to kind of help yourself, and are you doing those things?
Yeah.
I want to kind of have a level of rigor there.
Yeah.
Um, And exercise is probably the strongest variable in that. If people are not getting their heart rate up and, getting their body working for them, your body will produce a lot of the things that you need. That's a God-given thing, and that's
Mm.
a wonderful thing. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful design, and in reality, Jesus, and in biblical times, we didn't see too much of this. Well, why? Well, because they were a pedestrian society. They walked everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they had built-in ways to kind of get their body moving and to, get vitamin D from the sun. And they had a lot of things that we miss out on because we get into our garage, get into a car, drive to our place of employment, sit at a desk all day and stare at a screen like this. And we just have worked ourselves out of the necessity for exercise. And so we have to build it in artificially in our day and age. But if you're not doing that, and if you're not taking time to do that, then you're already starting at a deficit. Your body's working against itself. Okay.
I think you're speaking the love language of San Luis Obispo culture right now, hiking, but it's still so hard in the middle of shelter at home, job loss, anxiety. I've got, everybody's, if you're a parent, you're now a teacher, but you're also
Yeah.
trying to pay the bills, and everything just seemingly kind to mountain up, and
Yeah.
everybody's feeling that. So,
Yeah.
so you're
So
saying fight for, my wife said something
self-care.
today. You're gonna,
Yeah.
you're
Fight
gonna,
for
make,
that
you're gonna
self-care.
yeah, you're gonna make time for what you care about most. And
Hmm.
sometimes it seems selfish to care about self first, right? Even in the Christian community of like, pride is
That's
a
right.
4-letter word to some people, right? But or like,
Yeah. But I would challenge people too, though. Go back to the Gospels and read about the life of Christ. And one of the things you'll discover is that routinely through the Gospels, as you read it, the disciples would wake up and they'd be like, "Where's Jesus?" And Jesus was withdrawing. He was leaving his disciples. Oftentimes, he was leaving a line of people who were ready to be touched or healed.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So, he oftentimes withdrew
yeah,
for that very same reason, for self-care. Now, was he going to exercise? You know, oh, you could make the case he had to get there somehow,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so he was going to these places. He was out, and we don't know what he was doing. But one of the things that's very clear in Scripture to me, and one of the things that awakened some spiritual things for me, was learning that I could walk with God.
yeah,
You read about that in Scripture,
yeah,
but it's like, I had lots of, with all due respect to, the pastor preacher sitting in front of me here, um, I I had preachers my whole life telling me I need to get up every morning and, open my Bible and have my quiet time.
yeah,
And I was frustrated with that for years because I was always like, this doesn't feel life-giving to me.
yeah,
And me learning that I could go for a walk out in my neighborhood or get in my car and go drive to a park and take a walk and have my prayer time there with God was
yeah,
absolutely uh, life-giving.
right,
And it just turns out I like to walk with God. I think He likes to walk with me.
yeah,
And so I was not the type that was going to really be super edified by sitting there, for whatever amount of time every morning. It's like I needed to get up and move. I know a lot of men like that,
yeah.
who
I feel
who
that.
feel probably a lot of shame
Yeah,
because they don't do it well the way that their church growing up told them to do it. And that was me. And so I finally had a wonderful friend who, one time when I was in my season of studying my Bible, and he was like, you keep talking about how miserable you are trying to read read your Bible every day. He said, where do you feel closest to God?
yeah,
And I was like, probably when I'm out walking. And he was like, maybe you should close your Bible and just do that for a while. And I was like, I felt like heresy.
yeah,
I was like, I don't think that's allowed.
yeah,
My preacher growing up would not be okay with this plan.
yeah,
But turns out, as I walked with God, what happened, Brent, was I felt like He took me back to His Word, and
mm,
He took me back in a much more organic way. And I did find that I was ready to open my Bible, but maybe not, with the systematic reading plan that my preacher told me I needed to be a part of growing up.
yeah,
And it turns out He didn't know what I needed nearly as much as God did. He
yeah,
didn't know what I needed nearly as much as my good friend did, who spoke life into me and spoke truth to me.
That's good.
So I think, fighting for, and we've kind of, veered off there a little bit, but fighting for that self-care that says, I've got to figure out what it looks like for me to be healthy vertically in my relationship with God. And that's got to start here. But exercise, I think, is a big part of it. I've got a good friend who said, man, getting up and doing exercise and doing some yoga poses or whatever in the morning. And he's, a committed Christian person, but it's like, that just helps me get
Yeah.
into a frame of mind where I'm ready to be with people.
No, that's good.
And,
That
and
was
I
a
think
freeing
it's
thing.
important to recognize.
Yeah, that was a freeing thing for me to realize I don't have to sit down because I'm jittery I'm jittery right now. Sitting down for an hour is tough. But I think to know like every day for me is built in a run, whether it's 10, 15, and I often feel selfish, right? Coming home from a long day of work and saying, I gotta run, and I gotta pick my times, right? Because I also have to be aware to what's happening around me,
Yeah, absolutely.
and the needs of Jenna and my kids. But that has been life-giving to me to either run silently or to run and just pray and talk. And even in a pandemic, we can do these things. And it doesn't necessarily change my circumstances. Somebody commented and said, I need 2 jobs to make ends meet as a single mom.
Yeah.
Doctor put me on meds to help, and I feel it's helped, but I'm still struggling. It's even hard to pray sometimes, and I'm not sure what to do. And for us to realize, like, it may not, and you can speak to this too, but I know my circumstances may not change, right? Like the tension may not just go away. With everybody wants the light bulb, just turn it on moment, or the light switch moment. But we've talked about this often. Like, it's a journey, and it is a daily commitment. And it doesn't mean the circumstances change, but your perspective and your peace changes as you stay committed to some of the habits
Yeah.
and practices.
Yeah, to your single mom who wrote that one question or that one comment in there, I would say number one, man,
You're a rock star.
I'm so proud of her, because this is a crazy season for so many people. But when I think about the single parents out there, it's like, it is just asking a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
And so I just have a lot of compassion for folks who are struggling with that, and just and so I would say, way to go. Glad that she's working hard at that, and that she's, trying to make it work. And then the other thing I would say, years ago, I read something by John Ortberg, and it's always stuck with me.
Yeah.
And he wrote, I think it was a chapter in one of his books, but it was just called An Ordinary Day with Jesus.
Mm.
And he said, you know what? He said, just this one time, I'm going to give you permission. Like, don't do anything special for God. Just go through your day and try to invite him in. Let him watch Netflix with you. I don't know what he would think of Tiger King, but I have a feeling that he would probably sit there and go, okay, if this is what we're watching, then what draws you to that? What's appealing about that? I think he would have great questions, because he routinely got criticized for hanging out with the undesirable.
Yeah.
And guess what? He would love the invitation to hang out with the undesirable parts of us.
Right.
He would love that.
Right.
And he's not going to run away, and he's not going to shame us, because he didn't shame them then, and he's not going to shame us now. And so to me, I like fighting for, what are the redemptive things that we could kind of focus on, inviting God into our overeating, inviting God into taking one too many drinks at the end of the night, waking up the next day, and instead of feeling shame about that and burying it, and then coming back and medicating that the next night on your back porch, why not invite God in the next morning and go, God, what is that about? Help me understand what I was looking for last night.
Yeah.
He's more than happy to meet you there.
Yeah. One of the things, like, I don't know, in this season of disconnection, and like there's a reliance on kind of the social media, digital aspects of life. And I know you've worked a lot with high school students, and so probably walked through some of, the dangers of the internet and social media, what do you see a role, like the role social media plays in some of our like destruction, some of our undoing?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not, this isn't like a, it's all bad, it's all the devil, but like,
Uh,
how do you see it affecting us interpersonally and relationally?
yeah. Let me count the ways, that it's impacted us and our, the generations beyond me, especially. I didn't grow up with it. You're probably young enough that it was coming there, and you grew up with it maybe more than I did. But our kids today, it's like they're immersed in it, and it's an extension of who they are. So I don't know that we're putting the toothpaste back in the tube anytime soon. I don't think that's the case, but I do think it is absolutely a place for us to hide,
Yeah.
and that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, which Brent. It's like
Yeah.
we're really, that's where we want to go. We want to go somewhere where we can hide,
Yeah.
and what our devices do is they give us a safe place to hide simply by pulling that thing out of our pocket and just flipping through it, whether we're at home sitting on the couch
Yeah.
or whether we're out at the bus stop or whatever. It is a wonderful place for us to hide.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what, cause some of the, I think I've noticed social media, you know, I bet screen time is way up, right? And our distraction level in that, our comparison level, our looking at other people and the role comparison plays in some of our anxiety.
Yeah.
What is it about that brings up this panic, do you think?
Yeah, yeah, that's a big one, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's oftentimes there is a little bit of that male female difference. When I'm dealing with men, whether it's um, teenage boys or
Yeah.
grown men, I'm talking to them about the pornography aspect because I
Yeah.
think that's the appeal for us as men. It's like finding something again to medicate,
Yeah.
and oftentimes that's the biggest allure for men. For women, I think it is it's a measuring stick. It's looking at this and seeing what their fake book post is, about the
Fake book.
vacation that's
I've
so
never heard
charming.
that. I've never heard fake book before.
Fake, you've never heard fake book? Well, that's probably so much more appropriate.
Yeah.
I grew up with a Letterman from Sesame Street. And Letterman comes down and changes the C to a K. It's like, so it's fake book where it's our best foot forward. And I'll deal with clients, and I know their marriage is a train wreck, and then I'll suddenly see a post because it's just out there, and it's
Yeah.
like, wow, that looks like that was spectacular,
Right.
but it really was quite painful. But that was the snapshot that they fought
Right.
for,
Right.
because there's that pressure of we have to present things better than they are.
Right.
And again, it's unfortunate, but we're so what do we end up doing when we're flipping through all these things and making the comparisons? And we are just playing into the enemy's hands here,
Yeah.
because he's saying, I want you to compare your life to something that doesn't exist,
Yeah.
and oftentimes never has.
Never has. Yeah.
And it's such, I mean, it is always what he does, to try to get us to connect to something that's artificial.
Yeah.
And so that is very much pandemic, and was before coronavirus ever came along,
Yeah.
that we are trying to measure our own lives by somebody else's forgery.
Yeah. Yeah. Just going off of that, like spinning off of that a little bit and thinking about, you've mentioned like overeating, you've mentioned alcohol, you've mentioned, pornography, you've mentioned, toxic comparison syndrome or whatever it is, social media addiction. There we can list out all of the coping mechanisms that we all have. And I think there's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, right? That keeps it, like you said, a lot of hiding that keeps
Yeah.
us from being forthcoming with the thing that we've consciously or subconsciously been running to, that is not God. And so like how do you, because I think shame and guilt, fear of being found out or exposure, I don't know if you would agree with me, but I'm not the expert, feed some of the depressive the forces inside of us.
Yeah.
What is the role shame and guilt plays, and then how would you encourage someone just overloaded with shame and guilt?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, great question. And for me, shame is often very much at the root of some of these things. I was working with a guy the other day, and he's really struggled with depression. And I just asked him that simple question. We'd probably met a couple times, and finally I looked at him and I said, "What role does shame play in your depression?" And it kind of undid him, a little bit in the session, but then like even the next time we got together, he was like, "You kind of wrecked my world." It's like, he said, "I wouldn't have told you that I dealt with, you know, uh, insurmountable sense
Shame.
of shame." But he said that's exactly at the root of it is just that sense of, you're not enough. And again, there was some teaching a few years ago by a guy named Bob Hamp, and I really liked the teaching. It was revolutionary for me. I might have even had you listen to the podcast at one point, but he talked about, just I think the message was called "The Problem Jesus Came to Solve,"
Hmm.
and he goes all the way back to the garden, and he essentially says, there's the tree of life, and there's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And one of the things he talks about there, Brent, which is, just revolutionary. I'd never heard a pastor talk about this,
Yeah.
but he said, we talk a lot about the knowledge of evil in the church.
Yeah.
How you do these bad things. It's just like you said, all these bad things that we list out and we go, oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't drink too much. I certainly shouldn't watch porn, or I shouldn't do this or do that. We're really good at that in the church, of telling people what all the evil is.
Yeah.
What we're not so good at telling them is we're not so good at telling them the knowledge of good is just as dangerous as the knowledge of evil. It's the knowledge of good and evil that we weren't supposed to ever be the ones to figure that out. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you're flipping through Facebook, what are you looking at? Oh, well, that looks good.
Yeah.
That looks a lot better than my family. That looks a lot better than my vacation. That looks a lot better than my home or my car. We are putting ourselves in the place where we're saying, I want to be the purveyor of what's good for me.
Yeah.
And God essentially said, when you're walking with me, you don't have to worry about those things.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about the knowledge of evil. You don't have to worry about the knowledge of good. And as soon as Adam and Eve kind of went and took the fruit from that,
Yeah.
then this guy who was preaching, Bob Hamp, said, I'll make this strong statement. I think the knowledge of good has done a lot more damage in the Christian community over the last several generations than the knowledge of evil ever has.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, because I think because going off of that phrase of the knowledge of good can often make you feel equal shame as the bad that you've done. I'm comparing their good, or what I think is their good, or what they have, to what I do or don't have. And that breeds discontentedness and all those things. And I think especially in a pandemic where we're forced into quarters or spaces that are uncomfortable, that and maybe you're bored, or maybe you have way more time that you want, that you're kind of faced with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and faced with what you don't have, or faced with who you might be. And that not from like a shame perspective, but just like, man, like a hiking up a mountain with your son, and he says, hey, you're getting a little angry too quick, Dad. You can easily hear something like that. Somebody commented here a second ago and just said, I feel abandoned. I feel I feel lost and alone. And one minute I'm okay, the next I'm all in my head. I'm feeling depression, anxiety. I'm just holding on, and I need help. And I don't know. And so how do we walk out of shame? Like how do we walk out of?
Yeah. One thing I would say is I think it's, I'll
And
be
it's
so
not a
bold.
and it's not a light bulb. It's not like a light switch. It's a journey, right? It's a
No,
daily.
it is a journey. Okay. And yeah. And I think, the one bold statement I wanted to make is you don't do it alone.
Yeah,
You know, you don't walk out of those things alone.
yeah,
I don't think ever.
yeah,
Somebody may try and prove me wrong on that, but Thomas Merton, um, who was kind of one of the church fathers, and he kind of went down a path that some wouldn't agree with or whatever ultimately, but
yeah,
he spent the early years of his life kind of in isolation, trying to find God and discover God. And then one of his most famous quotes was when he came to the city of Louisville and he was down there in the mass of people, and he was like, I've been missing it this whole time. It's like, you know they are me and I am them, and we're all kind of in this thing together. And and even that sense, for some lonely hermit on a hillside,
yeah,
he encountered people, and he was like, man, this is missing.
yeah,
This has been missing from my life. And so, number one, I don't think we do it alone. Speaking to the person, who, because that was, really strong for them to kind of reach out and say they feel
yeah.
abandoned, they
It's
feel
bold. It's,
depressed and
yeah,
anxious. Yeah, appreciate that. And I would say to them, you're not alone. You know, you're not alone. And I know it feels that way. And so that can sound hollow for me to say that, however many thousands of miles away over here in Kentucky, but you're absolutely not alone. One of the verses that has just kept coming back to me time and time and time again throughout this, Brent, is that passage that says, for God did not give us a spirit of fear,
yeah,
but of power and self-control. And so, we have the ability to say, hey, I can't be alone, or I need to reach out. And I get it that with depression, with the anxiety of all this stuff going on, which can be very real.
yeah,
My clients with anxiety issues, I've been keeping close tabs on them and checking in and going, how are you doing? How's everything going? Because they were already anxious. And then all of this has just been like, a pressure cooker on
right.
their anxiety. And so I would say, I would really encourage them, even if that is a professional counselor. You've got to reach out and find somebody. And there's lots of folks like me. I'm working consistently. Things have slowed down a little bit, but I'm still working a lot, doing a lot of this,
Yeah,
and just spending time with people and talking with them and praying with them. And they need to understand they it's very hard to pull yourself out of a well by yourself,
yeah,
and they need some help.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in my life is like I can't fix myself, right? Like, which is almost against the American way of like, self-made man,
Oh
like,
yeah.
or woman, like I'm gonna, you can, I don't know, you can, I can't be my own savior, right? I love
Yeah.
that. You can't pull yourself out of a well, and
Yeah.
I think for all of us to know, no matter where you are, you know, economically or on whatever hierarchy or ladder that you think we are all in the same boat. We all struggle with that shame, and we all struggle with these same principles. And I think God gives us the ability, and God is a God who's not pointing a finger at us or shaking a fist, but offering a hand and saying,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
said, let me walk with you, and let me tell you, like a perfect father would, who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I can circle back, to something, because I think it's just worth sharing. I mentioned, that teaching that I got. I found this is so interesting to me anyway, but I found that so much of my counseling really flows from uh, the book of Genesis. That idea of walking with God,
Yeah.
the idea of trying to see, okay, is this the knowledge of evil that's getting me in trouble, or is this the knowledge of good that's getting me in trouble?
Huh.
Because, again, I was well versed in the evils that I was supposed to steer clear of, not so well versed in the goods,
Yeah.
that I was going to chase after. They were going to get me in trouble. And by the way, he makes the point in there too. It's like, who did Jesus really, get on the most?
Yeah.
He said, he routinely was, just down the throats of the people who were the purveyors of good.
Yeah.
It was the
Yeah.
Pharisees and Sadducees who thought they had it all figured out and were
Yeah.
looking down their nose at everybody else because they had achieved something or met, measure of success.
Yeah.
Even biblically, they would, memorize scripture and everything else. And it's like, but Jesus was like, no, those hearts are dark. But it was goodness that was clouding it, not evil.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I come back to, and I wanted to say this to everybody because it's just I look for my opportunities. Again, in the Christian church, I think we have just lost kind of one of our birthrights, and it's all the way back there in Genesis, in the very beginning. It says when God created Adam, He breathed the breath of life into Adam's nostrils, right?
Yeah.
And that same word for breath is the Hebrew word for spirit.
Ruah.
Right?
Yeah. Ruah.
Yeah.
Ruah.
Yeah. And so it's that word for spirit. And so I tell people it's time for us to take back from, the Buddhists and the Eastern religion, the idea of meditation and just breathing.
Yeah.
Okay. So for a lot of your folks out there that are just struggling, I would encourage them tonight just to kind of breathe in through the nose. You're doing it right there. Just breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. That clenched feeling. Okay, I said at a seminar several years ago, and it was one of those little life-changing moments for me. So simple. But he said this. He said, it is impossible for a body to panic when it's at rest.
Hmm.
And so those 8 to 10 deep cleansing breaths, I like to kind of, just because it's a part of my ritual, part of my faith, it's like, that idea of breathing in the spirit
Yeah.
and breathing out the problem.
Yeah.
And so just breathing in the spirit and breathing out the problem, just taking those deep breaths. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. A little exercise that I taught you. Have to teach that one at church sometime.
Well,
Right?
hey, I was going to tell you, like, that was revolutionary for me because I've used it a lot. I've preached that before. And I think that whole idea of like the things that you hold on to
Yeah.
is huge. And yeah, Tony has us do this, clench your fists, and, in your fists are the things that are maybe trapping you up, or your obstacles, or those things that are, weighing down on you, and you can just visualize them. And then the actual act of just letting them go, visualize,
Letting them go.
and then turning your hands over and saying, God, what do you want to fill my hands with? What do you want to fill
Yeah.
my heart with? How can I receive? I think is it, to some of the quote unquote, manly people, or the driven ones who can fix themselves, it can seem a little, odd at first, but that is a practice that I have used.
It's a great prayer practice. And one of the things that's best about it is exactly what I just talked about. It's like, God designed us. He made us. He understands us intimately. And what we do in that practice, kind of the palms down, palms up, is, if you really clench, like we tend to hang on to things, hang on to power, hang on to control, hang on to, our bad habits, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
As we decide we're going to release that and then do this, what happens is invariably your body teaches you.
Yeah.
And your body reminds you what that feels like, because you will feel the clenching go out of your body.
Yeah.
You feel it go out of your hands. I never take people through that experience where they don't have a sense all of a sudden. People talk about how, the catchphrases of God told me this or God told me that. And people go, I don't know, how to hear God. I take them through that exercise. And it's very rare, very, very rare that somebody doesn't have a sense of what God wants to give them when they have, taken their will, made it an active will, and said, I'm going to let go of whatever this is that's driving me crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to receive from God. And they know, whether it's peace or joy or contentment or, whatever, they have a sense of what it is, that good gift that God wants to give them in that moment.
Honestly, as you were doing the breathing thing, I just remembered that because that was so revolutionary for me in a difficult season of my life. And that's so, so, so good. I think I'm just processing all that. I want to save some for next Monday. You're back next Monday, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
are
sure.
you sure?
Right.
Because we're in this series called Under Pressure. This week, yesterday, we talked about depression and panic and walked through Second Chronicles and the story of Jehoshaphat and how, he was aware of his emotion of fear,
Yeah,
and he turned his attention to the Lord, and
yeah,
and God spoke, and they proclaimed a fast, and they actually had a moment of this, and God
yeah.
spoke and delivered them. And I think next week we're going to talk about relationships. And so we'll hang on to your encouragements for like practical steps for relationships. I'm going to be taking
Yeah.
notes. Everybody's going to be taking notes next Monday. I want to get back to a comment on Facebook that was one of the first ones. Bill, I'm sorry I skipped past it. He said, Tony, I love your comment on scripture and about encouraging one another. I believe it's a gift of the Spirit. How can we call that out in each other? Encourage the encouragers, question mark. Have you seen a trend where encouragers struggle with depression?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. We deal with folks in the helping fields, and right now, I mean, one of the areas that's growing for us is all the folks that are in the helping professions, especially healthcare. There was the headline today. You guys might have seen it. The ER doctor who committed suicide.
Hmm.
That's a national headline now. But I'll tell you, it's newsworthy because of everything that's going on, but
It's
it's
not new.
not new.
Yeah.
These folks, struggle, and so we talk about things like compassion fatigue, and that would probably be kind of the technical term, that Bill's experiencing or asking about. There is people who have that heart for loving people and caring for people. Yeah, absolutely. That's a real thing, and it's something even as counselors, as you can imagine. We always joke kind of in the field. It's like we all get here for a reason because we're trying to cure ourselves, and then the big kick when you go through the clinical training is they go, yeah, you really can't do that. You need help, and you need to kind of even part of our supervision process is we essentially sit with somebody for counseling and for supervision, to understand that principle. We have to be able to receive. And that's a challenge for a lot of folks, even a lot of very well-intentioned folks who are working their tails off, whether it's in the hospital or it's in your neighborhood or under your own roof. Again, some of these, parents who are, now homeschool teachers, we need to be able to kind of just understand we can get worn out with that, and we can get compassion fatigue, and that's now we've come full circle tonight, Brent, right?
Yeah.
Because that self-care piece, if you really want to be around to love your family, to love your spouse, then you've got to make sure that you're doing the self-care. Nobody else is going to do that for you.
Yeah.
There might be some pushy moms out there who would like to do that for everybody in the or dads in the household, but the reality is you've got to be the one to kind of fight for that yourself.
Yeah.
And so understanding that in a season like this, the needs aren't going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
I fully anticipate we're going to hit probably a recession. I hope it's not prolonged, but it's like that's going to ratchet up more problems and more issues for people emotionally, even when we deal with some of the physical things that are going on.
Yeah.
And so this is going to be something in the long haul where we've got to care for ourselves so that we're in a position to do the one another's that that the scripture is littered with, all the one another's.
Yeah. What's maybe one or two practical things that we could do? You've hit on several actually, but maybe like if we're battling, and again, this is all relative, and you've talked about medication in this time. We talked about so much stuff. I'm not taking notes, but I'm going to watch it back. But any practical things that we could do to like say, okay, yeah, self-care, I'm going to prioritize this in this season because I know, yeah, like you said, people are depending upon me, and I want to be my best self. I was reflecting on love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength recently. And I recognize like, am I taking care of my mind? What am I doing to sharpen my mind right now?
Yeah.
What am I doing to to care for my heart? Like, what am I doing to care for my soul? What am I doing to care for my strength, my physical? And I love that you talked about the physical aspects of getting out and moving. And do you have any other practical steps of like,
Yeah. Yeah, so a few things, and these are some that maybe other people have talked about, but I think they are worth mentioning. One is, especially for folks who are quarantined at home, working from home, we
Yeah,
talk about the work home blur, or the work life blur,
yeah,
and a lot of people are feeling that, where does work begin and end, and where does family start again, and those are great questions, those are important questions. And so I think trying to come up with, as an individual or as a family, doesn't matter, whatever your living situation is, understanding that finding a new normal, even in this quarantine time, and then post quarantine, we're still going to have to fight for interaction.
yeah,
We're still going to have to fight for, how do we, connect well, because we're still going to be, socially distancing. And so, again, I tell people, social distancing does not mean social isolation. And so we got to fight for that. I
yeah,
know there's been times for me where it's just like, even with the neighbors in the backyard, it's like talking across the fence. It's like, I need something. And
yeah.
it's like, some people are reluctant to do that. Don't freak anybody out,
Right.
but fight for those times and places where you can have some sense of normalcy, and then, but routine, kind of finding that routine that addresses those key things that you just talked about, Brent, would be a great start. How am I doing that? I think also, one thing I've talked about is, sleep is a great barometer. You know, um, Not enough sleep can be a problem in this time too. And I'm kind of back and forth on that. It's like,
Yeah,
I have times where it's like, man, how many naps have I taken today? On the weekend, where it's like, things are just slow, and my kids are grown, so it's like Ron and I, bouncing off the walls in our house here. But then there's other times where it's like, because I'm binging Netflix, or because I'm doing this or that or the other, it's like I'm not getting enough sleep.
yeah,
And so sleep is a great barometer. We want to have that, for most healthy people, that 6 to 8 hours of sleep is a good window. Okay, so if you're getting a lot less than that, then that's the problem. If you're getting a lot more than that, and you're sleeping half of your day away, it's like, that's not good.
yeah,
So even for our kids, I know a lot of parents are struggling with that, but it's like, for your children, you don't have to have the same rigorous schedule that they would have had maybe in the public school or whatever,
yeah,
but at least give them some sense of routine.
yeah,
And these are their work times, and these are their down times. And then, by all means, as I said earlier, get out and take a walk. Get out and, sit out in your backyard and just let the sun do its work. To kind of give you, just, some sense of health that you can invite in on a
yeah.
daily basis.
We'll talk about this in a couple weeks, but one of the things I feel like a lot of people are struggling with right now is like, maybe you are furloughed, or you've got high credentials, and you just feel like this sinking lack of purpose. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that we'll address together. But I think that routine and that schedule for me, where I've seen it slip, is I don't know when work ends, and I let family time, work, rest, play. They don't. There's no like off on. It's kind of like
Yeah.
I'm always kind of working or responding to that message or checking the email or doing the thing. And I've learned, because I like spontaneity. I don't know if you know that, but I like this. And it's been like almost a kind of like a drug in this season, or like a coping mechanism, that work can be a coping
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
coping
Sure.
mechanism for stress or for anxiety or for
Yeah.
pressure. And
Sure.
so anyway,
Yeah.
um, I just yeah. Any closing thoughts for tonight? We're out of time, but
I'm probably circling back to something I said earlier. I wish I'd said it maybe more often, and so I'll end with it. But I would just really, try and find those, I would say, times during your day, especially if you feel that sense of being clenched, if you feel that tightness, that stress, that, hitting the wall.
yeah,
For me, I mean, again, people have different opinions about it, but I do. I'll smoke the occasional cigar, and I'll tell you, one of the things it does for me is it slows me down, right?
yeah,
And it just gives me a good excuse to sit out and do nothing,
Yeah.
Might not necessarily help the breathing, but the
Yeah.
walking helps with that too.
Yeah.
Is just that sense of slowing down and breathing. And what I'd say that does to your body is to declench. And for me, that's become a very spiritual
Yeah.
habit. That as I feel that, I can feel the tension in my neck now from leaning forward. I've got
Oh, me too.
Zoom neck.
Oh,
You know, in my 50s here.
yeah.
But I feel that a lot right now doing telehealth, and I'm leaning in, and that's just my nature. I want to try and connect, and somehow I'm getting closer to the screen, but I feel the tension. And when I feel that clenched sense, I want to be able to kind of breathe and slow down. And it's almost immediate how it helps to just kind of ground me.
Yeah.
And especially connecting it from a spiritual standpoint is very helpful for me. Breathing in the spirit and breathing out the problem, whether that's a stiff neck or a distant family member or spouse, or whether it's my boss who won't tell me what's going on at work and it's driving me crazy and I don't have the information I need. Whatever the problem is, God will meet you right there, and he's happy to do for you what he did for Adam in the garden, and just to kind of fill you up again
Yeah.
and to help you kind of focus on him and get rid of the problem, whatever it might be.
The spiritual, the walking with Jesus, how many times does he stop in the middle of busyness? And I think that is it seems so simple to preach and to say, but just to stop and breathe. Apple's onto it now. Apple tells me to breathe every night at 10:30 p.m. because I'm probably clenched or something.
Take a
But
mindful breath, Brent, right?
yeah, yeah, and actually sit back and reflect and think. I don't know. I was telling my brother-in-law today, we hiked the mountain, in the physical act of hiking up the hill and looking over the city, and the physical just like perspective reminded me of the spiritual perspective of like
Yeah.
and I think there's so much that we can look at in that. And I appreciate your wisdom in this. And
Yeah,
so,
very healing. And that's what we got to do, is kind of take those moments to heal ourselves a little bit.
well, I appreciate you staying up late. You're a party animal. And is your son, is your family quarantining together? Like your whole family?
We
Who's
have,
back
so
there?
we have,
Who's in the back
yeah,
there? Who's back behind you?
I don't know. Oh, that's Rachel and my youngest.
That's
So
awesome.
that's my oldest, who's my daughter,
Yeah.
and then my youngest son, and they
Okay.
are playing some game
That's awesome.
on the TV right now.
That's
So,
awesome. That's awesome.
yep.
Well, we love you and we're thankful for you. I love you. You've been huge for me, and I'm excited to connect again on next
Hey,
Monday.
yes, next Monday, and I'm going ahead and putting my reservation in somewhere. I certainly hope. I think I told you that we were heading out to Yosemite, and I think we're flying into San Jose or
Yeah.
something. So I know we're not too far. It'd be awesome if we had the
Oh,
opportunity to get out there. We'll
well,
have
we're
to
gonna
see
make
if
you.
that works out at some
We'll
point.
probably have to make you work if you're here. We're gonna do
Uh,
like
I'm,
a marriage seminar or something, just like a 3-hour sit with Tony and Rhonda. And
Now we'll see, but I would love to just kind of be out there and be in your space and see, what's going on with you guys. So we miss you, and appreciate the invitation to be a part of it, Brent.
all right, well, have a good night, and we'll catch back up here soon.
All right, man. Take care.
See ya.